Again, בסדר. says the Gemara Moed Katan Daf Gimel, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Yamim she'osifu chachamim lifnei Rosh Hashanah. We say about them, it's a long, difficult sugya. I'm cutting one line out of it. So the question is, do you get malkot for transgressing Tosefet Shviit? That's the Gemara's question, right? If I plow 2 weeks before Shemitah, do I get malkot? If I plow during Shemitah, presumably I do get malkot, right? So assuming Chaysha is a lav d'oraita, not going to that right now, but presumably if it's a lav d'oraita, so you get malkot, right? The Gemara says, what about plowing right before Shemitah? Well, you're not allowed to, but do you get malkot for that? That's the Gemara's question. Says Tosefet, I don't understand. Im tomar malkot minalan. V'alon lo ktiv b'tosefet lav, ela segreida b'chesh v'ketzot lishbot. Tosefet says there's no lav in the pasuk, right? Tosefet says there's no lav in the pasuk. Now, is there no lav in the pasuk? Well, that depends on how you look at it, right? Because you can say, well, it says b'chizra ketzot yishbot, and Lashon Shvita is not an isur; it's only an isur aseh. It says what you should do, not what you shouldn't, right? You should refrain. So when it says in the Torah you should refrain, that's not something you generally look at for. Now, there's a very simple answer for Tosefet's question, Chora. It's so simple, Tosefet themselves answer. Ika l'meimah, בחריש ובקציר מפקינן דצריך תוספת, כלומר שהשביעית מתחילה משנה השישית, וכל דין שביעית היא על השישית, דאחי כאמר רחמנא, שביעית מתחילת קודם שנת שביעית, ואם כן הוא כשביעית, meaning. Say Tosefot, how do I know there's malkot? Very simple. If it's Shemitah, there's malkot. In other words, B'chrish v'katzir, say Tosefot, doesn't teach me that you're not allowed to plow before and you're not allowed to reap after. It teaches me that Shemitah starts before its limited time. If you eat on Yom Kippur, you're chayav karet. Now, what happens if you eat 20 minutes before Yom Kippur? In the time that the Torah told us that you have to start Yom Kippur, there's no lav there. It just says Batish'ah. So yes, Batish'ah defines the time. Defines the time span of Yom Kippur. So you chayav karet on that time, not because you transgressed the Isur of Tosefet Yom Kippur. You're chayav karet because it's Yom Kippur. You say, wait, but it's not the 10th. Right, that's the point. The point is Yom Kippur is not only the 10th, it's also the 9th. Says Tosefot, the same applies for Shemitah. Shemitah does not start on Aleph Elul and Aleph Tishrei, on the 1st of Tishrei and end on the 30th of Elul. That's not the way this works. When we said Charish v'Katzir, we said Shemitah starts a month before. I'm just throwing out a month. We're going to see it's more difficult than that. But just for argument's sake for the moment, Shemitah starts a month before Shemitah. So, should you get Malkot for that Tosefet? The answer is yes, you should, because it's Shemitah. This seems to go exactly against Rabbi Akiva Eiger, right? Rabbi Akiva Eiger says you can only extrapolate the very, very specific, or maybe you could only infer, right? You can only infer very, very specific transgressions, but not the general idea that Shemitah has already begun, right? Tosefot is more in line here with the Sfat Emet. The Sfat Emet says, we've extended the time span of Shemitah. Say Tosefot, okay, so what about Malkot in that time? Do I have a lav? And the answer is yes, because it's Shemitah. So you carry over the lavim of Shemitah to the time before and after. This seems to be against Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Akiva Eiger's interpretation of we're only extending these specific lavim. It's only specific lavim. Okay, so do you get Malkot for these lavim? That's a good question, right? Tosefot seems to ignore that. Okay, let's see the way the Or Zarua learns this. Hadebai b'Rosh Hashanah, Masad Rosh Hashanah. The Rabbi Akiva havi nitem lama lihachi perusho. Ila Rabbi Akiva nami letosefet ata, havel lerabui nami tosefet Shabbat ve'tovim mishmitin shmitu Shabbatchem, k'ma shedarish Rabbi Yishmael. Mai duchke leukma lekrad b'chrish v'katzot yishbot b'shviit. Muki lahata mimile uchra, ולין לרבי עקיבא שום תוספת ביום הכיפורים ושבת וימים טובים כי אם דרבנן, בין לפניהם בין לאחריהם. Someone has to wake Dr. Borelowitz up, because this is the other side that he needs to hear. The Or Zarua says, Mideoraita, Rabbi Akiva holds there's only one kind of Tosefet, and which is that Tosefet Shviit. Question: why would there only be Tosefet Shviit and not Tosefet? Forget the kind. Sorry, I already kind of ruined the word here. Yes, because Rabbi Akiva says the Or Zarua, according to Rabbi Akiva, there's only Tosefet Michol al Kodesh during Shemitah. Why? Why would it be like that? Why would Tosefet only apply to Shemitah? Well, what about other Chagim? It seems that only that kind of Tosefet, Rabbi Akiva does not hold by this idea that you have to start the day beyond its natural limits. If that's the day Hashem said you should, right? If Hashem says you have to fast on the 10th of Tishrei, fast on the 10th of Tishrei. Hashem says you're allowed to do melacha on the 15th of Nisan, so you can't do melacha on the 15th of Nisan. Now you're going to tell me, no, but really you have to start on the 14th and then on the 16th. What are you talking about? If Hashem wanted to extend it, he extended, but he didn't, so we're done. Chazal said it sometime before, it sometime after, kavod, oneg, great, everything's great. Right, you have to mechabed Shabbat, you have to be prepared for it in advance, it's all wonderful, but it's not doraita. Because this whole notion of starting Shabbat early is a drabanan notion. When the Gemara says the Or Zarua, an astonishing thing, just wanted to take this back to the Pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara says, Mosfim Mechol HaKodesh Minayin. Rabbi Akiva really does intend to answer. He says, yes, there's only one kind of Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh Midoraita. You ask me, how do I know that there's a Doraita notion of Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh? Only Shemitah. Only Shemitah. Only in a place where the plowing will affect the time, the holy time. Shabbos, Yom Kippur, it's nice, it's great, it's drabanan. Rabbi Yishmael disagrees with the whole notion and says, no, Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh, when I talk about Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh, what I mean is adding time beyond its natural limits. So the Or Zarua says this not as a question mark, he says this with an exclamation point, right? Says, this is the way this works. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael really are arguing, what is, when I say Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh, Rabbi Akiva says, Doraita, there's only one in Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh, and that is preparing before and reaping benefits after. That Tosefet Mechol HaKodesh does not apply to Shabbatot or Chagim. It only applies to Shemitah. That's the way Rabbi Akiva learns. Rabbi Yishmael disagrees. And then it's a real machloket. Now, back to the Tosefet. The Tosefet asked, what about Malkot? Would you get Malkot during Tosefet? So the Tosefet, yeah, you should. Why should you get Malkot during Tosefet? Because it's Shemitah already. Meaning, Rabbi Tosefet obviously disagrees with Or Zarua and says, when Rabbi Akiva said, and says, therefore you can't plow before Shemitah, he also means you can't do any other melacha before Shemitah. Any melacha that applies to Shemitah. Any melacha that affects the Shemitah is not allowed to be done pre-Shemitah. The Ritva brings B'Shem Rashi. We don't have this Rashi, but the Ritva answers this question differently. Same question Tosefet asked. Right? Does not say the word lo or lav or anything like that in the pasuk, and therefore there should not be malkot. Says the Ritva. So same question Tosefet asked. Tosefet asked, so why should there be malkot? Tosefet's answer was because it's Shemitah. It's not the 7th year. I don't care. The 7th year is only Shviit. It's not Shemitah. Shemitah starts before and ends after. Rashi says in Achinami, in Achinami, when the Gemara says, do you get Malkot for Tosefet Shviit? It cannot mean Malkot Doraita, because that doesn't make sense. You see how far the distance between Rashi and Tosefet is. Tosefot say also. Rashi says we're not talking about an extension of Shemitah. We're talking about specific Isur to prepare Shemitah. Okay, this specific Isur, does that have a lav? No, just as B'chalish v'katzot yishbot. There's no lav. There's no malkot either. The Gemara is about malkot. Drabanan. It can't be doraita because there's no lav. So this sounds exactly like Rabbi Akiva Eiger, right? Who says we're extending very, very specific things. The Turei Even said, when you talk about Tosefet Shviit, we mean specific, very specific things that you can't do before or after. It's nothing to do with the same notion of Tosefet Shabbat, Tosefet Yom Kippurim, etc. It's an extension of the time. it applies to very, very specific Isurim, which is exactly what Rashi is saying over here. That's what Rashi says. If this is an extension of the time frame of Shemitah, of course you get Malkot. Why not? It's Shemitah, and you're transgressing Shemitah. Clearly, Rashi does not think that this is a transgression of Shemitah per se. He says that per transgression of this very, very specific Isur of preparing for Shemitah, but it's specific Isur, specific, right? This also goes in line with the Or Zarua, right? The Or Zarua who says Rabbi Akiva only accepts the notion of Tosefet Shviit in the sense that preparing before and reaping after, and reaping benefits after, does not accept the idea of the extension of the time. Therefore, the Or Zarua cannot agree with Tosefet who says, yeah, well, we extend the time frame, and therefore you get Malkot. No, you did not extend the time frame. That's what the Or Zarua says. There's no extension of the time frame anywhere in the Torah. Drabanan thing, you should, guys, don't get me wrong, every Shabbos, you should start Shabbos before Shabbat and end it after Shabbat. But it's before and after Shabbat. It's not an extended time frame, midoraita, only midrabanan. And in that line, Rashi says, when Rabbi Akiva says you extend the time, so you're transgressing a very, very specific Isur, b'chalish, which is not allowed, and therefore there won't be Malkot either, it's all drabanan. Again, just to make clear what I said just now, I don't mean that the whole notion of Tosefet is drabanan. The Tosefet is doraita. It's naseh doraita that's called b'chalish v'katzir tishbot. Right? It's what. Don't confuse this. When Rashi says over here, Torah Ritva b'shem Rashi that we do not have, he says Yilkeh makat mardut drabanan. He means you're going to get makat mardut on the aseh you transgressed. That's drabanan. The Isur would still be doraita because it says in the pasuk b'chalish v'katzir tishbot. But again, it's a very, very specific Isur. It's not, did you transgress Shviit? The answer is no. I say, wait, so what have I done wrong? You transgressed Tosefet Shviit, which is a different Isur Doraisa, a Sed Doraita. That's the idea.